Welcome to the Beyond Jiu Jitsu podcast. My name is Kieren Lefebvre, and I'm joined by my co-host, coach, mentor, father figure, Adam Child.
What's up, brah?
I beat you to it today.
Yeah, I know. Looking good, Kieren. What's happening?
Man, just living my life. I'm suffering from a bit of the old DOMS actually from training
From last night?
from the 2 days. So Monday I had
How was last night's class?
Oh, it was pretty rough, eh? It was good. It was good. So to fill our listeners in, last night was a Tuesday, and we had a bit of a competition style class on our 6:30 class.
Ish, yeah, just essentially
ish,
trying to get people again. If you've listened to all the episodes, you'll know that we recently came out of lockdown in Sydney. So just trying to, not dive headfirst in because that's a recipe for disaster. But we've been out of lockdown for a couple of weeks now, so it's time to start
easing back.
Yeah, getting the training back to the intensity that it was. So it was a bit more of a competition style class.
I was trying to explain to one of our newer guys, like he's not new to jiu-jitsu, but he's new to our gym. I was like, yeah, you wait. Like this was this was a bit, a bit of a step up from what he's used
was
to. This was Rob.
Oh,
yeah, Rob, shout out to Rob, one of our new white belts.
It's tough. Like,
he's a tough
Rob
guy.
actually used to train with Lockie down at Absolute.
Yeah.
in Melbourne.
So he's definitely not new. But I was explaining how the competition classes run, and then I was like, yeah, man, that's real fucked.
Well, yeah, I mean, last night's class I would put as there were maybe a higher volume of rolls than a standard class, but I mean, it was what I consider a pretty standard class.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
agreed.
say that was a competition class, but it's like trying to build the team back up to where they were before we all essentially had a mandatory 3 months off. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So you're, just to fill the listeners in, like because there's many different ways you run your competition classes, but one of the ways is the warm-up is 5 minutes each of whatever you want to drill, or just like a flow roll, something along those lines. Maybe you'll do one warm-up technique sequence or just a standard warm-up, either way. And then we pretty much go straight into rolls. It varies between, what we're trying to work on. But generally they're about, around that 7, maximum 10-minute mark. And it will incorporate some form of point system. So
usually, yeah. Because I mean, if you're doing competition training, I mean, you're preparing for competition jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's going to depend on the competition. If you were about to go into some type of sub-only comp, you're going to prepare. You're not going to care at all about the points. But if you're talking just your run-of-the-mill jiu-jitsu competition that are points-based, man, you better understand how the point system works.
Yeah.
I was a victim to losing to opponents when I was at lower belts because I didn't necessarily completely understand the rules or the points, and you give away points that you shouldn't have. So if you're fighting in that type of competition, you got to prepare for it.
Yeah.
So I mean, competition training is definitely a higher volume of rolls, but it's usually always specifically designed. Like, it's not as black and white as just, let's just roll, right? It's, you're always trying to simulate something that happens in the competition. So, for example, last night was trying to hammer through the point of the idea of not conceding silly points or silly positions. So there was for lack of a better word, a punishment system in place, the punishment being burpees for people who conceded points when they shouldn't have, essentially really trying to develop that inbuilt fight to not let people establish positions or to make sure that you establish your positions. But, other competition training is more stand-up focused, or it's more, specific position focused or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was definitely, in terms of post-lockdown class, is the hardest class we've done so far.
Yeah.
We only opened up 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So I had a real tough set of roles on Monday night, mostly with the likes of Samir and a few others. And then last night, just nail in the
You went
coffin.
with some big boys. You had a good one with Samir. Did you have?
Yeah.
You rolled with Eric.
Yep.
Everyone,
I rolled
our
Eric.
frequent listeners know who Eric is. Fuck Eric.
Yeah.
Right?
I want to, like, the whole fuck Craig Jones hashtag. I want to get
one.
like,
Eric.
you said that yesterday. I'm stealing that.
So good.
So I roll with Eric.
Big Joe as well.
I roll with Joe.
You?
I roll with Ollie. I roll with Samir. Like, it was
Did
tough.
you roll
rolls.
with Carl, the big?
No, I didn't roll with Carl last night. I rolled with him on Monday. But yeah, I was just getting smashed. I lost. I'm going to be open. I lost every single roll
Last night,
except Joe and I. Like, it was a tie, but I conceded. I conceded his takedown. And got past, recovered, and then we stood up, and then I did the same thing to him. So with the exception of that roll, which was a tough roll, I got hammered. I got smashed. Yeah. Samir,
you look like you're making yourself trying to feel better about it today. This is for when there's a YouTube clip uploaded of this episode. You're the fanciest dressed you've ever been for a podcast. That's a brand new jumper, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm breaking it in.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to. We're going to get into the episode soon.
I was just thinking, I was like, we're 5 minutes in. We haven't even read. What are we? Episode 33.
Yeah, 33. So
people are still. Well, they would have read the description.
Man, they've skipped to this point. Like they've skipped. Like, when the fuck are they going to talk about something I'm interested in? But no, I'm like going to Sweden for Christmas. So.
That is not going to keep you warm in Sweden.
No, this is like one of the like second layer.
Because it'll be winter when you're there too, right?
So what I wear normally is like a dead middle of winter. So normally what I wear is like thermal, then something like this over the top, or a shirt, and then this, then what we would think of as like a jumper, or like a light jacket, and then a big winter jacket over the top. So it's like 4 or 5 layers.
Yeah.
And this is like one of them for wearing indoors.
Yeah, but the thermal is really what
keeps you warm.
Yeah. I remember like when I was living in Canada, like the thermal is like you can't leave home essentially without thermals, and then you can often get by with just wearing, like the thermal skins as well for your legs, and then a pair of jeans, right?
Yeah, that's
sometimes
what I normally
enough.
do. Yeah.
But the most annoying part is then when you're going in and out of places,
it takes
then
10 minutes.
Yeah, because like you rug up to go out, and then you walk into the supermarket, and you're like, God, it's boiling in here. But
But
anyway, jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, today we're talking about why you're not being promoted. You specifically, you who is listening, why you are not being promoted.
I thought you were talking to me, why I'm not being promoted. I was like, just not good enough, bro, I guess.
But you are being promoted. But we're talking about, we did a whole episode on that, like episode 30 or something.
Yeah, we did, not episode 30. That's the Ask a Black Belt. Would have been episode like 28 or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was actually. Fuck, look at you go. You actually got something right.
Was it 28?
No, it was nutrition.
Shit.
It was 27. Anyway,
shit, I was
go back
pretty
and
close.
listen to those.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about why you, the listener, I'm talking to you, you're not being promoted, and what your coach or what a coach is looking for to promote each belt. So basically the format of today, we're going to go through and take a bit of a deep dive into white belt to blue belt to purple to brown, and of course, brown to black from someone who has promoted each of those belts. So let's get into it.
First, I mean, be a short episode. It's all about the bribes, money.
Yeah. Straight up.
Yeah.
So what is your price for?
Yeah. So blue belt comes in at the cheapest, of course. Right? No.
How much are we talking about?
I think I am.
You name your price.
I've got a student who works in like property development, and he's developing like a bunch of apartments, right? A residential block. And there'll be really nice apartments far out of my, like in when he first told me, I was like, hey man, I'll buy one of those. Like I'll buy one right off the bat, cause you know how when you buy property, if it's being developed, you can usually get it. Yeah. If you get in like right at the beginning, right? Yep. And I was like, yeah, I'll take the first apartment, blah, blah, blah. But it's like one of those blocks where the whole level is the one apartment opposed to.
Damn.
Yeah. So
what are we talking?
Opposed to it being a 3-story building with like 6 or 12 apartments in it or whatever, it's only 3 apartments, right?
How much is the apartment?
Oh, I don't know, right? I have no idea. But each apartment's like 3-4 bedroom in the eastern suburbs, right? I mean, it'll be like
millions and millions.
Yeah, it'd be like I don't know, like a $3 to $5 million apartment.
Yeah, it depends on where it is, but yeah.
Well out of my price range, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I said to him, I was like, oh, bro, I'll give you like $20 and a black belt.
That'd be worth it.
Yeah, so why aren't you getting promoted? I mean, obviously, every instructor promotes at their own discretion, right? Some instructors promote very quickly, or very easily. Because some instructors use it as incorrectly, in my opinion, they'll use it as a way to purchase their student.
Yeah, we spoke about that, and that you were saying that generally speaking, blue belt is used for that purpose, right?
Yeah, I mean, it happens a lot. You see people get their blue belts relatively quickly / easily.
Particularly if you get it online.
Yeah. How do you feel about Gracie University and online blue belts?
I was just mentioning, like, you can buy blue belts on Scramble, you can buy them, Hyperfly. Man, you can get blue belts anywhere. Why is it?
I mean, you can. I got my black belt from eBay. You can get them anywhere.
Yeah,
right?
Amazon, man.
Amazon,
it's super cheap.
Yeah. So you see it a lot, because then to some degree you buy like some loyalty of your student. Like I know students who were moments away from leaving said gym, but then all of a sudden they got promoted and now they feel like,
well, that's a perfect time to leave.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. So you see that. There was a guy, I can't remember his name, but I remember like he was one of the sort of first kind of Brazilian black belt guys who went and moved to Canada and lived in Canada. And in the jiu-jitsu community, to the educated jiu-jitsu community, he had quite a bad reputation because he gave out his black belts really easily. And so it kind of, in the beginning, from a marketing point of view, it like spread his name because everyone's like, oh, I'm a black belt from whatever, Marcus so-and-so, black belt from Marcus so-and-so. So like his name, Marcus so-and-so, like, he kind of went for that marketing strategy where you just have
how easy are we talking?
I mean, it's probably worth you booking tickets to Canada.
You're talking like a 12-month boot camp?
Yeah. No, I'm not exactly sure specifically,
right.
But, so his marketing strategy was to flood the market, right?
Wouldn't that backfire on him?
Well, yeah, in the long run it does because then people start going, oh, you're a black belt from Marcus so-and-so and you're terrible, right?
That's it.
But, when we've spoken in other episodes or at other points in time where we talked about how to choose the correct gym. And I said, well, if you don't have a friend recommending you or anything like that, you just kind of got to go off faith that the instructor knows what he's talking about, because you don't know if he's a legitimate black belt or not. Like, where is your point of reference?
And that's
a complete beginner white belt,
right?
Yeah. Right. So if you're some dog shit black belt, you're still going to appeal to brand new white belts who have no idea. Right. Because they don't know, like,
I'm under you.
Yeah, I know, right. Anyway, go. Oh, sorry, phone call. I've got to go. Right. So that was. I remember Fabio talking about it. This guy, and in the long run, it backfires. Okay, so every instructor is going to be different. I always say I try to hold students to a standard that I was held to, and there's kind of. For me, there's 3 categories that students fall into. They fall into one of the 3 or multiple of the 3, right? And depending on which category they fall into is going to change the way I grade them, right? And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. So the average person trains jiu-jitsu as, a hobby or 2-3 times a week or whatever, right? Are they ever going to go on to become world champion? No, right? Because jiu-jitsu's grown enough that if you want to reach that level, it's got to be a full-time job. But they still want to progress, right? So it'd be unfair to hold them to the standards to say like, oh, well, for you to be a blue belt, or for me to give you your purple belt, you've got to be essentially winning worlds at blue belt. No, man, like that guy's never going to win worlds at blue belt because that's not the reason he trains, right? But he still wants to progress. So if you're in that category, you're going to be graded a certain way, right? The second category would be people who want to compete. And then I think it's only fair to them that there is some level of correlation between their competition results and their belt. I'm not saying that means you need to be a blue belt world champion to get your purple belt, but I mean, they need to be progressing side by side to some degree, right? Back in the day, actually, Jacare told me that so Jacare is Fabio's instructor, right? And Jacare is a black belt from Holes Gracie. Like, you know, Jacare is one of the few non-Gracie people who trained with like the original Gracies, right? And he said back in his day, to get your next belt, you had to win what was essentially the Worlds at the time, was like a competition in Rio. But there was only like one competition a year, or I think maybe two a year, right? And you had to win that to get your next belt. So you had like one shot a year to win a competition to promote, right? And then over time they realized like, man, no one is changing belts, like, you know, so then then it kind of trickled to, okay, you've got to make the podium in the competition to get your next belt. And then obviously what hasn't remained that way. But imagine if it did, right? Like imagine if you had to be the best in the world at that belt before you got your next belt, you would have worldwide, like, you know, well, okay, across the weight divisions, but you would have there's like 7 different weight divisions. You would only have 7 blue belts become purple belts per year worldwide. Like it's ridiculous, right? So, but anyway, if there needs to be at least some correlation, like if you want to be a competitor, it's not fair to you if I go, oh, Kieren's at the level of a brand new blue belt, here's a purple belt, right? And then like throw you in to compete against purple belts. Yeah, there can be, you know, on the one hand, you will still learn something because you're getting thrown in the deep end, like a bit of sink or swim mentality. But you know what I'm trying to say. The third category would be people who want to be instructors, right? And this is where people are either like, you can be a hobbyist on its own, or you can be a hobbyist who wants to be an instructor. You can be a competitor on its own, or a competitor who wants to be an instructor. Like an instructor can, you know, depends on the individual. And then that is going to require, you know, a deep understanding of the knowledge of jiu-jitsu and the techniques themselves, right? So after that long rant, okay, they're the 3 categories that I consider the students fall into. And depending on which one of those you fall into,
it's different standards in different areas.
Different standards, right? So yeah, the easiest one to sort of kind of take out of the conversation for the rest of the episode is, like I said, is competitors, because there needs to be some correlation, right, between your belts and your competition performance. Okay, so yeah, if you're a purple belt wanting to get their brown belt and you've done, you know, 20 competitions at purple belt and every single competition you've lost your first match. I'm not saying you need to get to a point where you're winning every match, where you're becoming world champion, but, you know, like there's, you know, it's either time for that person to maybe reassess the possibilities of what they can achieve, right? And maybe they need to become more of a hobbyist, right? Like maybe it's just same as for me, right? Like I wanted to become a world champion. It just never happened, right? Like not everyone can achieve the goals they set, right? Or they need more time at that belt. Okay. So the harder one to give definitive answers on is the hobbyist. Okay. And for me, if we go, let's start with white belt, right? Firstly, there's a certain amount of attendance that needs to be done. That doesn't mean you just do X amount of classes and you get your blue belt. No, it just means I need you to do a minimum amount of classes, because it's not possible for you to learn the information that I require you to know by doing less than that number of classes. Like it's just not possible, right? So if the number was hypothetically like 50 classes, which it's not, but let's say it was, right? Like I know that if you've only done 20 classes, like it's not possible that you haven't done enough, you haven't attended enough jiu-jitsu for you to know what I want you to know to become a blue belt, right? But without going over exactly what is in a blue belt test, and we can talk about belt tests, and because not every gym does belt tests, right? Without going through what I put in the belt test, from white to blue, it's not a huge jump, right? Like it's something that is awesome to achieve, but I don't want to take away from anyone who's achieved their blue belt, but it's definitely not the hardest. Like it's the easiest belt to get.
Which it should be,
Which
right?
it should be, right? You know,
makes sense. It's the first colored belt.
Exactly, right? And so it's not that difficult to obtain a blue belt, right? And, you know, in all seriousness, us sitting across from each other, people know by now, like, you train with me, you're a white belt. And it's like, well, you know, and you should know from the conversation that you fall more in the competitor category because you want to compete, right? So that doesn't mean if someone next to you at the gym who you smash every single day in the gym and I give them their blue belt, that doesn't mean I'm saying they're better than you. Like, I mean, you guys are on two different categories, like two different paths. Like it's not a competition between you and that dude standing next to you, right? But achieving your blue belt is awesome, and I'm super proud of anyone who does it. But yeah, it's not the hardest thing. And what I think as a whole, I'm looking for as to award someone a blue belt is really just laying that solid foundation of jiu-jitsu, of understanding like the core principles of jiu-jitsu, what makes it work. So understanding things like leverage and base and applied technique, right? Understanding you don't need to know a million takedowns or judo throws, but you got to know some takedowns. You got to know some, you've got to know like how to pull guard. You've got to know some self-defense techniques. Essentially, you're looking for someone to know a little bit of everything, right? So you don't have to be super proficient at everything, but would I give a blue belt to someone who doesn't know a single side control escape? No, right? They're not there yet, right? Do they have to know 10 side control escapes? Of course not, right? But they need to know a bit of everything. And I often say, like, if you break it into those core 5 positions of close guard, half guard, side control, mount, and back control, do you know a little bit of each position, top and bottom? And I mean, that in a nutshell is like my blue belt test, right? And the blue belt test I take my students through. And some people listening might think belt tests are stupid. I used to think belt tests were stupid, right? But it's a great way to really test if someone knows something. For me, as more of a, like, I really like the strategic side of jiu-jitsu. I think it's important people know. And I'm going to give an analogy that I didn't come up with, which is a shocker. I usually come up with my own analogies, but a perfect way that it was explained to me once was the similarities between learning jiu-jitsu and learning a language. You know, you get some guys who are world champions in jiu-jitsu, but when you ask them questions about jiu-jitsu, or if you see them teach jiu-jitsu, it's no different to asking a native English speaker to teach you English, right? Like they don't know. I mean, yeah, they've learnt some grammar and stuff through school, but like they're not an English teacher. They just do it because they're native. It's natural for them. Whereas I want my students, especially if it's a student who's wanting to become an instructor, I want them to be more like an English teacher. Like I want to be able to say to them, why is this sentence structured like this? Opposed to them just saying, well, it just is, because it sounds weird if you say it the other way, right?
Right. So you're saying when you teach a technique, or whenever anyone is teaching a technique, there'll be some things they say like, ensure that you put your hand here, right? Or make sure you get this grip before you release that grip. And then if you have someone that asks, like, you know, the white belt, but why?
Why?
And then they're like, oh, just because.
Yeah.
And that is not sufficient. You need them to then go into the detail. Well, no, you need this grip first to block their hips. Otherwise they'll re-guard. Or
exactly. Like what the question I always ask, right? Like when we're teaching a like side control to mount, and I kind of always ask everyone, what's the most important detail? Okay, you got to control this arm, because what happens if you don't? They get half guard, then take you back, right? So they're things that even a white belt doing a blue belt test, I want them to know.
Yeah.
Even if it's someone who doesn't want to be an instructor, there's some stuff that I'm like, there's for me zero wiggle room. You know, like you got to know this, and especially certain things that safety's involved. Like, oh, you got to know X, Y, Z, because otherwise you can seriously hurt someone. Or if you don't know it, like you can get hurt. Or there's certain things where you can hurt yourself if you don't understand the mechanics of how a technique's working and how it's being applied.
My mind's going to leg entanglements.
Leg entanglements, super complicated. Example. But even things like, you know, let's say like a shoulder roll, right? A movement that people learn in their first class. But why do we roll diagonally across our back and come up on the opposite hip? Well, because we don't want to hit our neck on, like if you think about it, do a shoulder roll on the concrete and then answer those questions. Well, because we don't want our head to hit the ground. We want minimum contact with our spine in the ground, and we want to come up on our glute, because if we come up with our hip square, our tailbone hits the concrete, which hurts, right? Yeah. So it's the reason why, you know, you look at how a stunt performer falls over, or parkour guys who run and jump and then roll out of it. Like, it's because it's the safest way to roll, right? You know, and you might think, well, that's silly. Like, I'm never going to train jiu-jitsu on concrete. Yeah, of course not. But I mean, it still doesn't mean you don't learn how to do it correctly. And these are things where for me, there's zero wiggle room. Even if you don't want to be an instructor and you're just a hobbyist, you need to know this, right? So that's what I'm looking for from white to blue belt. I'm like, okay, you've done enough classes that you've done enough classes to have learnt this information. Now I want you to do a blue belt test, because I want to make sure you know it. Because sometimes you might know something, but when someone asks you, show me this, you go, oh shit. I remember when I did my brown belt test, and I was at the point where I was like, I didn't do a blue belt test or purple belt test because I was more like of a competitor, right, at those belts. So
do you get your competitors to do blue belt tests?
Look at you. Look at you. I mean, you're a special case, Kieren. So,
you do 2 tests.
Yeah. I'm not going to, no comment, right?
All right. You keep your secrets. You shifty little,
but yeah,
little man.
But so I didn't do belt tests for my blue or purple belt, but I did for my brown. And I was quite happy to, actually, because, I mean, initially when I was asked to do it, I was a bit, it's bullshit. I didn't have to do it.
Why do I need to be tested?
But then I was like, you know, I'm actually glad, because as someone who's working towards opening a gym, and one day I was like, how can I put people through belt tests if I've never done one myself? So I remember when I was doing my brown belt test, it was actually Michael Lange, who's now the partner with Fabio, now owns part of Alliance São Paulo, the gym that I'm from. And Lange was an instructor when I was there, but now he's the head instructor, because Fabio's, you know, obviously he's been teaching for multiple decades, doesn't teach that much anymore. Lange's the head instructor. And so Lange was doing my brown belt test with me. And I remember halfway through, I was doing side control escapes, and I know them, but halfway through the test, like, Fabio walked in the room and just started watching. And just that then he was there, I was like, and I like forgot everything I had to do. And Fabio was like, I'll leave you to it. And he walked off. And I was like, yeah, fuck off, dude. You know, like, can't concentrate with you watching over me. You know? So, you know, I think that's important as well. When people are like on the spot and it's like a pass or fail, you know, it's like a lot of things, right? You know, like, if you're a skateboarder and you can do kick flips all day long, but then it's like, man, do a kick flip now, and if you land it, I'll give you such and such.
Yeah,
like
$1 million.
Then the stress kicks in, right?
Yeah, you start doubting yourself.
Exactly. Blue belt to purple belt is a much harder belt, right? Like, it's blue belts. I think it's quite well known to anyone listening, but for people who aren't into jiu-jitsu, who happen to be listening, blue belt is notoriously the hardest belt. It's
people get stuck on that belt as well. Not even people that, like, I know the blue belt blues is a thing, and we've spoken about that. People quitting.
Yeah. We did an episode on why people quit jiu-jitsu.
We did, and we spent a lot of time drilling down into blue belts. That was one of our earlier episodes. So I've seen, or I know of, blue belts that just get stuck at that belt for like 5-6 years.
Yeah.
What's the go?
So, yeah, like, let's say it's someone who's not quitting, but they're still stuck. Like, then they haven't been able to, they've done their, you know, minimum amount of classes, right? And they haven't been able to make it over into that purple belt range. Again, if we're just talking about the hobbyists, right? So there could be 2 factors from my point of view. One is there's someone who's actually just potentially not retaining any of the knowledge. Like, they're not investing the time into really knowing it. Maybe they don't want to be an instructor, but that doesn't mean they still don't need to know shit, right? I still want them to understand, if it were learning English, I still want them to understand the grammar and stuff. I just don't expect them to go on to become an English professor.
I can see how that happens, because when I just want to riff for a second, when I first started as a white belt, everything that I learned was new. So as soon as I learned a new technique, it went straight into my arsenal. And because I only had, you know, 1 or 2 things I knew, I just started practicing whatever you taught.
Yeah.
However, as
Over
time
time, you've realized that
Exactly.
multiple techniques I teach are garbage.
Exactly.
So you know to filter out the crap ones
Exactly.
and retain the yeah.
No, but without that is the exact point I'm making. Not that they're garbage. That it's like, oh, okay, but you can lie to yourself. Oh, I don't need this. This doesn't apply to my game. Like I fell into that trap whenever we were doing like lapel stuff, which I do now, by the way. Like early days, I'm talking the first 6 months. Arrogantly, I was like, oh well, I don't really use that in my game, so I'm going to spend more time on the other stuff.
Yeah.
However, that is not the correct approach, and I think that particularly in the more senior blue belts, and I'm just speaking, thinking out loud here, is they would have a very select game, right? They would have a few techniques that they like to implement. They would have a few things they go to, their A game, right? And most of them that fall in this category would spend vast majority of their time during rolls emphasizing and working on those techniques and neglecting to practice all the new things that they've learned. So of course they're never going to be able to retain it.
Yeah. Or at least, they need to be, like they don't necessarily need to drill it or practice it, right? But, they need to try to retain that information because it's easy, like you said, to kind of think, oh, I'm never going to use it. That's not applicable to me. Me as a bigger guy, like someone who's almost 2 meters tall, like 6'4", there's plenty of techniques that are more like, little person techniques. And there's techniques that I'll teach that I'll even teach it saying, guys, this really only works if you've got super long legs in relation to your opponent, like I do, right? And because that's also the beauty about jiu-jitsu, you find what works best for your body. But when I teach, let's say I teach a technique that kind of requires you to have quite long legs, right? When I teach it, I specifically say to people, I know there's a bunch of you here that don't have long legs and won't be able to do this, but you best learn it because what if your opponent has long legs, right? I'll give you the perfect example, right? Ben Hodgkinson is a black belt out of Absolute MMA from Lockie. I've never really trained with Ben, but I've met him a bunch of times. He helps run the grappling industries competitions here in Australia. And yeah, I've never really trained with him, but from what I've been told from JT, who was on the podcast recently,
29.
episode 29, Ben's game, despite coming out of Absolute MMA, he's not really a leg locker. Like he likes to pass and take the back and finish from the back. But you'd be lying to yourself if you thought he wasn't educated about leg locks. Because if he weren't educated about them, he would get leg locked all the time.
Yep.
It's the fact that he's educated about leg locks that allows him to do his game, which from what I'm told is more passing, take the back. So
I definitely have to agree in my limited experience that if I'm going against an opponent that's using a technique that I like, it is a lot easier to deal with. It is so much easier because I know what is going to trouble them because I do it myself and I know what troubles me in that position.
Yeah. So a blue belt they've been blue belt longer than the minimum time requirement. They've done the minimum amount of classes. They're still, they've been there 5-6 years or whatever. So they haven't quit. Their dedication hasn't wavered in terms they're still doing their 3 classes a week or whatever. For me, it's either going to be, they're either not retaining any of that information. And, there could be multiple factors. Maybe I'm a bad instructor or the instructor teaching isn't. No, like legitimately, right? Like, because
fair enough.
I'm just saying as a whole, maybe it's because the instructor is not relaying that information very well, right? There's good teachers and bad teachers in everything. Some teachers don't give you the information in a way that you can digest it, right? So that could be a factor, right? Or it could be that they're still not performing at the level they need to. They're not a competitor, so that means they don't have to beat every other blue belt, and be beating the purple belts or whatever. But, there's nothing wrong with tapping to a lower belt. That's fine. Everyone should be humble enough for that to happen. But if let's say, for example, you're a blue belt who thinks that like any day now they're going to get their purple belt, yet you still get your ass kicked by that one stripe white belt, man, like there's a bit of like, no, I'm not saying if you're a blue belt who gets tapped by a white belt, that's going to be a big cross, like, oh, he's not ready for his purple belt. That's not what I'm saying. But I mean, as a whole, if you're the 4-stripe blue belt who just like can't beat anyone in the gym except the day 1 white belt, I mean, there's something off, right? But there's so many factors to consider, is that blue belt someone who picked up jiu-jitsu when they were already in their late 50s, and that 1-stripe white belt they're losing to is a 17-year-old? I mean, that's a different situation, right? But if you want to sort of simplify it, it's either they're not retaining the information, right? Or that they're still not performing as well as they should. I know they're not wanting to be a competitor, but it is a physical sport, right? So, you need to be able to perform to some level, and depending on which one of those there is, you should take the appropriate steps to get there. And if you have a good enough instructor, they'll give you that feedback.
Yeah, I was about to. That was a question I was about to lead into. If someone was to approach you, say a senior blue belt at your gym was to approach you and like, hey, Ads, I'm thinking about belt progression. Not asking the taboo like, oh, when's my next belt? But I'm thinking about belt progression. What do I need to do to improve? To be at the next level.
Yeah.
That's appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I know there's some people who would say, oh, you can't even mention that to your instructor, blah, blah, blah. Man, fuck off. Like, I mean, if you don't ask, you don't know, right? There's so many of those unspoken rules, and it's taboo to ask. Like, I mean, it's a bit awkward to ask, like, when am I getting my belt? Don't you think I should be this belt already? Blah, blah, blah. That's, I don't know, that's a bit weird because it is at the instructor's discretion. And I've said before, if you think about jiu-jitsu gyms like universities, right, the instructor you're getting the university or school you go to has different standards. And that can even be in just regular primary schools, right? I know some schools where kids in year 3 have absurd amounts of homework, and other schools that don't give any homework, right? Like, everyone's different. And so if you feel like you should be a purple belt, but your instructor's not giving it to you, man, if you expect him to lower his standards for you, no, man. It's like, if you don't like it, go train somewhere where it's easier. If you can't pass law at Harvard, go to bloody Blacktown TAFE and become a lawyer. Like, I mean, it's different standards. Me personally, I like to think I'll never lower my standards, and because I want to retain the quality that I was held to, and I hope I can continue to do that. But yeah, asking in terms of, man, like, I feel a bit stuck. Like, what do I need to do? What am I missing? And I did have one student, a white belt, ask me that recently. And I said to him, I was like, man, it's just your lack of attendance. I said, I know it's hard for you. You've got a very demanding job. You've got a wife. You've got kids. Like, I know there's other factors, but, that doesn't mean, like, I'm not changing my standards to cater to every single individual person's life's needs. That's not how it works, right?
And that's the beauty of jiu-jitsu belts.
Well, I mean, it's also I think it's just the beauty of having standards, right? I mean, again, the same as at school. Like, I mean, if you were trying to pass the bar to become a lawyer and you went there and said to them, like, man, I know I've only come to 1 class opposed to 5 a week, but my job and this and that, they're going to be like, well, dude, like, it's pass or fail, like, I'm not going to then be like, oh, you know what, man, I'm only going to require you to make a 40% pass rate. No, like, so, but the fact that he asked me, like, it's fine. I'm not offended by that. He's just like, oh, I don't know. Like, what do I need to do? And I said, man, you need to be here more, like, you barely train. Right. So that question is fine. Aaron, who's one of our purple belts, and he came over from another gym as a blue belt, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know he came over at blue.
Yeah. So he came over, and I can't remember if he was already a 4-stripe blue belt. I think he was, because when he told the other gym that he was leaving, they were all like, oh, but you're up for promotion, right? Are you sure you want to leave? And he didn't leave on bad terms. He left just because logistic-wise, like, he moved, right? So it was just a bit far for him to go to the other gym. And he got to a point where it was either change gyms or quit jiu-jitsu because he wasn't going to continue to make that drive. And I remember he did ask me, he was like, oh, I was up for my purple belt there. Where do you think I am? And I remember it was a bit crushing for him because I said to him, I was like, oh, Asbro, look, yeah, from my standards, like you're kind of at the point you're at, you're kind of like a pretty fresh blue belt, you know, like
you're lucky to be a blue belt, mate. You're fucking white belt 4-stripe.
But I was like, you need a couple, you need I need a bit of time with you at blue belt. And I think he did, what was it? Maybe like a year or 18 months or something at blue belt with me. So I think in total he did like 5 years at blue belt, something like that. But anyway, that's my standards. So asking that question is fine. If you have a good enough coach, they're going to either tell you, man, you know, you're not performing. I don't need you to beat every single other blue belt and every white belt in the gym, but you're not performing at well enough for all the other factors, excuse me, for all the other factors that I'm taking into consideration, like did you start Jiu Jitsu in your early 60s as a bonding exercise with your grandson? I don't know, right? Like, or are you a 17-year-old? Like, I'm going to take those into consideration when I'm saying you're not performing where I would like you to perform.
There's no one standard of
that's
performance,
right. Like
right? It's not like a line in the sand and you got to be here no matter what.
That's right. Like it's like I go, man, you're not performing. For me to wrap a purple belt around your, 21-year-old ass and you're like a fit, healthy, jacked 21-year-old who, you're not performing where I'd want, right? Or, man, you're mid-60s, you're not performing what I would want to see someone of your age to perform at, right? Or they need to buckle down and study a bit more. And maybe it's because they're not turning up enough or whatever it is. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
I feel like I've done a lot of just like mindless rambling.
No, I do have a question that this comes up often at white belt level. But I just want to go through this question and then we can go through your standards for blue to purple. We'll just finish that off and then purple to brown and brown to black. So I see this comment a lot and I have this discussion with white belts a lot. And it will be something along the lines of, I've been a white belt for a year or I've been a white belt for 18 months, whatever, somewhere around that minimum time, air quotes, and I'm smashing the other blue belts in the gym. Or even like I'm a white belt 1-stripe and I'm smashing the 4 stripes.
Yeah.
Why aren't I being promoted? This is bullshit. I'm tapping out blue belts, but I'm still a white belt. Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. Our friend fuck Eric, right?
Yep.
So Eric's, God, how many stripes?
Our friend didn't fuck Eric. We're saying that. We're saying hashtag fuck Eric.
Yeah. So I think Eric's got how many stripes? Like three or four?
Yeah.
And again, just to summarize for people who haven't listened to the other episodes, Eric is quite a natural. He's like 6'4", 6'5", ex-professional basketball player, super fit, flexible, mobile, like not what you would expect someone of his frame to be. Very naturally gifted, has the mindset of a professional athlete. And like I had a purple belt from our gym message me and say, Adam, how upset should I be that Eric swept me, passed me, and then submitted me, right? And I was like, so Eric can smash, like, sometimes he smashes a purple belt. I'm like, but then if you were to say, if Eric's sitting there going, man, I'm smashing all the other white belts and some of the blues, sometimes I tap the purple belts, why aren't I a blue belt? In Eric's case, if you're listening, Eric, right, which he does listen to the podcast. So Eric, for you, if you're having that thought, why aren't you a blue belt yet? Man, yeah, you're performing really well, but the knowledge isn't there yet. So like if I said to you, Eric, here's this brand new white belt, like, okay, you don't need to teach them perfectly, but if that brand new white, like if you're wearing a blue belt, by default, the brand new white belt knows you're more senior and will potentially ask you questions. And if they're asking a complicated question, of course you're not going to know the answer. But let's say in Eric's case, if that brand new white belt looks to you as someone wearing a blue belt, because I've decided just to give it to you, and they say to you, oh, Eric, man, when I'm on mount on the bottom, like I have no idea what to do. And you can't answer that question, like that's not good, because I wouldn't give a blue belt to someone who doesn't know at least one mount escape or the fundamental understanding of like what's dangerous when you're mount on the bottom. So for Eric at the moment, it's like he performs really well. You know that. You roll with him almost every day. he performs really well, right? I mean, Eric's 40 now, I think. He's 40 years old. Man, Eric performs like he could be 20 and you would go, he performs really well for a 20-year-old.
Yeah, 100%.
Like he's crazy, like he's a specimen. But the knowledge.
We have a man crush.
Yeah. I mean, I do have a photo of him in that locket around my neck. Yeah. Like the knowledge isn't there yet, right? So that's like sometimes when people are like, man, I've been a white belt for 18 months. I'm smashing all these people. I'm like, yeah, cool. You might be smashing them because you're just a specimen. But, you know, you haven't got that, not the whole package, but there's a few things that need to be rounded out first.
So there's more to belt progression than just tapping out someone at a higher belt than you.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if I tap out like
And the thing as well, right? Like what if that blue belt or what if that purple belt you tapped out is the purple belt who, started Jiu Jitsu in their late 40s and they do it once a week for fun because,
like I've tapped out purple belt that was like 20, 25 kilos lighter than me, you know, and in their 40s. It's like, cool.
Yeah.
I'm like 26 in my athletic peak and I, you know,
right,
fairly athletic, you know, train every day.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
And you also don't even know, was that purple belt having a bad day?
Exactly.
Was that purple belt?
They could have been chilling. They could have been resting.
Yeah. Was that purple belt, you know, humble enough to not care? So he was trying a completely new technique.
Exactly.
And, you know, man, I do that all the time. I try a technique with someone, whether they're the same belt or a lower belt. And as it happens in my head, I'm saying, well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
And I just get my guard pass. Or like that didn't work and I land in a triangle. You know, like.
Yeah. And sometimes like I might be coming into the gym with the intention, okay, today I'm going light. Like I don't really mind what happens. And that can be very difficult for me to stick to that plan because I get to the position where I'm training with someone that, you know, I normally need to go, you know, try to beat, you know what I mean? Like we're at a fairly similar level, but in order to win, I need to like, you know, bring it.
Yeah.
And then I'll be in a position where I'm playing guard, which I don't normally like doing or something like that. I'm like, nah, fuck this because I'm losing, right? So you switch because in my arrogant sort of mind, I'm like, oh, I don't want them to think that they fucking smash me when I'm I don't want to be that guy.
It's a classic competitor mindset.
Oh yeah,
right?
And you don't want to be that guy that I've thought about this, but have thought better after the role. Be like, oh, sorry, man, I'm just taking a rest today.
Oh, this dude sucks.
I'm like, what the fuck? Like, you don't need to say it, and if you say it, it just comes off like you're a sore loser and you're just having a sook, right?
It's so funny. Like Joey and I had our first role post lockdown the other week. And Joey and I train so much together. Like we have such a good training relationship in terms of, you know, neither one of us cares who wins or loses or gets submitted or whatever. And we can train light. We can train like we can go hard.
And Joey's a brown belt, a senior brown belt.
Yeah. And we can go super hard with each other and there's zero animosity. And we had a roll, it was like first roll after lockdown. It started really flowy. Then it just turned into this super intense roll. And he was all like, at the end of the roll, he's like, bro, here I am thinking we're having a flow roll. And you just like, you know, come at me. And I'm like, bro, you came at me. And it was like that whole like
mutual
like
escalation.
You know, right. Like, still to now, I feel like he turned it on, but I know that he thinks I turned it on. And I don't know, maybe we turned it on at the same time. I'm not sure, but it just turned into this full-blown like, nah, bro.
I do the same thing.
But with no animosity, right?
Yeah, of course. So we have a black belt that's been training at our gym recently, Carl, and he said way he rolls, particularly with lower belts, is he'll match their level.
Yeah.
I try to do that when I'm like, oh, you know, I'm just chilling, feel it out, blah, blah, blah. I try and do the same, match the level. But what I find is no matter what, it just, because you want to win and they want to win.
Like
so
escalates.
regardless of whether it's a flow roll, like it just escalates. So in order to flow roll by matching someone's level, you need to concede.
Yeah, or you need to be significantly more advanced than them.
Yeah,
you know?
you can understand.
So you can like control the whole role.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. So we've sort of established the blue to purple. It's you need to understand your fundamentals. You need to have everything that you're meant to have from white to blue and more, and be performing to not a set standard for everyone, but a set standard based on the individual. So that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Ignoring competitor and coach for now. Just the Gen Pop person, right? So what about, just briefly,
Purple to brown.
purple to brown?
So
That's a big step.
yeah, purple to brown, I because it's that, brown belt's that one before black.
Yeah.
So, you could look at blue belt being okay, I'm not brand new anymore. Purple belt's like okay, you're intermediate.
Yeah.
Brown belt's like advanced, and then black belt's black belt, right? So brown belt's a big deal. So we got a few purple belts in the gym, so I have to be careful what I say. But it needs to be that, without saying too much, it needs to be that little bit extra. You need to be doing not a huge difference from blue to purple, but just at that next level. So you need to not only understand more techniques, but you need to understand them better. Again, I'm not saying you need to be a coach, to get your brown belt, you need to, if you could say, you need to understand the techniques really well. But if you were then someone who wanted to be a coach, you would need to understand them extremely well. So even if you're not wanting to be a coach, I still want you to be able to understand the techniques and why and what and all this. So you need to understand more techniques, and the techniques understand them better, right? So, for example, when I do the belt tests, when I'm first explaining a little bit to a white belt who's doing a blue belt test how it works, I often give this example. I go, let's say you're doing your blue belt test and I ask you to show me a guard pass, okay? And you just do like a very sloppy leg drag, hypothetically. You just do a sloppy leg drag and I'm like, okay, like that's more or less fine, right? I'm just looking for you to know a guard pass. Then you're doing your purple belt test. Okay, that sloppy leg drag isn't going to cut it. That leg drag better be way more precise, okay, in terms of, what's happening with your leg and knee and where's their leg and, where's your drawstring grip and all these other factors. Then your brown belt test, the leg drag needs to be executed, as well as it was at purple belt, obviously, or better, but I would like that at purple belt, you can already, from a physical point of view, execute it air quotes, more or less perfectly.
Yeah.
So at brown belt, there doesn't need to be a huge difference in how you're performing it physically, but like if at any point I said, why do you have that grip? What happens if you don't have that grip? And why is that hand there? Like I would need you to know that, right? And then, you still need to be performing as well. So it's, let's say if I said when you're going blue to purple, okay, you don't need to be, smashing every other blue belt and everything, but I wouldn't want to see you losing to one stripe white belts. I mean, if you're a purple belt who's about to get your brown, I kind of wouldn't want to see you losing to any white belt, like there's always exceptions to the rule. Like, oh, that white belt, I forgot to tell you, he's an NCAA Division I wrestler. My bad, right? Like, I mean, obviously there's always exceptions to the rule, and some people as well are just from a different planet, right? Like a white belt can come in and towel up a black belt, hypothetically, right? But I would want to see you. It's not a huge difference from that blue to purple, that purple to brown, but it's just that next level up. I want to really see that you fundamentally understand what you're talking about. When I think there's no wiggle room for you not knowing the answer to very basic questions. Man, I'm not going to put a brown belt around your waist if you need to and ah when a white belt or even a blue belt asks like a very basic question.
What's an example?
Like a basic question, like, how do I escape side control? Or like, how do I tighten up a triangle? Or why don't I cross my feet? Why do they say not to cross your feet when you do an arm bar?
Okay, right.
Right. Which are super basic questions. Or like, man, if you're, I would never put a brown belt around your waist if you still flare your elbows when you do a cross collar choke. Like, man, these are basic things, right? They're mistakes that potentially blue and purple belts may still make, right? But I mean, I ain't putting a brown belt around your waist if you don't know those things, right? Because for me, they're super basic and fundamental. And if you've been doing enough classes and training with me, like you should know those.
Yeah.
And if you don't, me individually, I know it's not because I haven't taught you, because I know the way I teach. You might come from a gym where they don't teach you well, and I mean, that's on that gym, right? But I know for me personally, I teach those things correctly, right? And I explain them correctly, why and the why.
Yeah.
So I'm not putting the brown belt around your waist if you haven't retained that information that I've told you.
For me, I need to see you teach, depending on the technique, of course, but I need to see you teach a technique probably about 3 times to feel confident with it. Like,
yeah, because each time that'll be different detail, right?
A perfect example. I may have mentioned this before, and this is something I'm still bloody not quite there with. But the hip bump sweep, it's one of many, but just an example. I've probably seen you teach that about 3 times now, and every single time I pick up something. That's why it's not working for me. That's why this isn't working. Or like if you teach a technique that I'm really familiar with, which I love, because then I learned those 1%ers, right?
Yeah.
Like a prime example, over under. You did that in the first week back, and that is something that we were working on before and during lockdown. And when you taught that again, the over under, I was like, fuck yeah, because I picked up all these 1%ers.
Or even if maybe then when I teach that over under, maybe I don't mention a new detail for you, right? All the details I mention in that, because
that would be identical,
yeah, because you don't tell every detail when you teach a technique. Otherwise, you'd spend 40 minutes teaching one technique. So maybe in that particular class, I don't give you a new detail, but then it's another opportunity for me to watch you drill it and correct you, or it's another opportunity for you to drill it, and then while you've got your 3 minutes or whatever to drill, you can ask a question.
Yeah. Like, hey, I get in this position, like I did last night.
Exactly.
Ask you
so
specific
it's
question.
Another opportunity to improve that same technique. So that's what I'm looking for at brown belt, a level up from what I look for from blue to brown in terms of, but it is that next, like, man, you're then advanced, like you're wearing that one belt below black. You may not feel like you're this senior person, but all those belts below you are going like, oh man, like brown belt, like that's no joke. And again, you don't need to be the toughest dude in the room or in the world, but I'm going to want you to be performing at the standard that I believe you're capable of. Right? And I want everyone to progress, but I've made as an instructor, my own opinions about that individual and what they're capable of. And, if you're not performing to what I know you're capable of, right, it'd be the same as, if you were my personal trainer and I can deadlift or whatever we're working on, I can do XYZ, I can deadlift 140, let's say, for example, but then you see
deadlift 140?
I did once with a forklift. But then you see me, let's say, like maxing out at 80 kilos, right? This is a silly example, but you're going to be going like, man, I know like you're more capable of that, and I think a good coach can see that. They can see whether you're like JT. When we had him on the podcast, I spoke about how much I enjoyed training with him. And I've done multiple types of training with James, whether it's strength and conditioning, whether it's mobility, whether it's jiu-jitsu training. And he's really good at being able to tell and I don't know, well, this is one credit to his coaching ability, but also just that we've spent so much time together. Like he can tell whether I'm, being lazy or whether I'm maxing out, So I'm going to want to see that you're performing to the standard that I think you're capable of, because I want the best for you as well.
So here's the $1 million question.
Brown to black.
Brown to black.
Yeah. So then I think the best way I could summarize that, again, aside from needing to then know another level up from those same requirements of blue to purple, purple to brown, black belts for me something more special. You don't need to want to be an instructor or be a competitor. I said there's those 3 categories. You might only be a hobbyist and only ever be a hobbyist, but if that hobby has not become a fundamental part of your life, I don't really want to give you a black belt.
It's not a box ticking exercise.
That's like,
right. On my life goals, it's like, achieve black belt in jiu-jitsu.
And that's not to say that I'm sure one day I'll have black belts who then go on to never train jiu-jitsu again. You know, like it's inevitable that that would or could happen, even if it's against their best interest. Like life happens, right? Maybe they move somewhere where there's no gyms. Maybe they have a, you know, jiu-jitsu ending injury. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, like what happened? Their mum gets sick and they got to move to, I mean, anything can happen, right? Or maybe they just fall out of love with it. That could happen too.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's, I mean, I think it's something special. At least it was super special to me. And short of other real world achievements like my wife and my son, you know, it is the single greatest achievement I've ever obtained. You know, it's the thing I'm the most proud of, you know, and I'm only going to hand it out to other people who I feel it means something similar to them.
And of course, they have to meet all of the other expectations. They need to be at that standard. They need to be obviously, you know, performing at where you expect. So all of that is a caveat.
Yeah, and then some. Because even if you're someone who never wants to be an instructor, man, people are going to look up to you as a black belt. There's no way you get away with being a black belt and people not asking you questions.
You're like the default instructor at that point. You're a default coach.
Even if you don't want to be, people go like, that dude's a black belt.
Yep.
And they are, you know, so you better know all that stuff too. Again, I'm not going to hold you to the standards of someone who wants to be an instructor. They're being held to this like, man, you better really know your shit. Opposed to like, you just got to know your shit.
Because at that point, if you award someone a black belt that you know they are going to be an instructor, you want to be in that position where you can put them as a head instructor of a gym.
Pretty much, yeah. Like I don't want to. Oh, another way that this is what Fabio used to always say. He goes, and again, I try to hold the same standards as I was held to. Fabio would always say, when I look at a student and I go, that guy's ready for his blue belt. He goes, that's the point where I then go, I'll wait a little longer. So he waits until he's at a point where he goes, they're ready for their belt. And once he gets to that point, he then waits an undetermined amount of time more. So, you know, and especially for his competitors, like if you're a blue belt going to purple belt, again, he doesn't necessarily go, I want you to, your first match as purple belt, be the best purple belt in the world. But he's like, I want to give you your purple belt so you can go in as a competitive purple belt. Yes, you still room to grow and everything, but I don't want you to go in at the very bottom of the tank of purple belts. I want you to go in as a competitive purple belt and have the potential to win.
Makes perfect sense.
So I do that as well. Like you've got to, so when you think about, someone, would I expect them to be in a position to go on and be a head instructor? Yeah. Like I don't want to give you your black, if you want to be an instructor, I'm not going to give you your black belt and go, now your instructor training starts. Like, no, I'm going to, because I would have already gotten this guy's ready for their black belt. Now I'll wait a bit longer. Kind of reminds me of a Muhammad Ali quote where he was asked, how many sit-ups can you do?
Yeah.
And he said, I don't count my sit-ups. I start counting when it starts hurting.
Yeah, I was thinking of that exact same thing. Yeah,
because that's when it matters. And it's kind of,
it's the same.
I mean, it's similar but different.
It's like, do the reps until it starts burning, then count your reps.
Yeah. So it's same thing. I'm not even counting until I'm like, you're ready. You could have that belt already, but now I wait more because I really want to make sure, you know, and I mean, I've seen so many people get their black belts and the waterworks come on. For most people, it's something super special, right? I've seen so many people cry when they get their black belts. Did you cry
when you got your black belt?
I did not. Man. The last memorable time I cried was was when I was a kid and I watched the movie Homeward Bound. It's the only movie I've ever cried in. I think this was an old movie when I watched it.
Never even heard of it.
Homeward Bound is one of those movies where the main characters are animals. In this case, I think it was like two dogs and a cat, I think. Have you heard of Milo and Otis? Oh, that's even before Homeward Bound.
Man, that's super like familiar, but I'm not.
Anyway, it's like the animals are the main characters and they can talk amongst themselves. They can't talk as in, you know, to the humans.
Got you.
But the premise of the movie is the two dogs and cats get lost from their home and they're trying to get back. And at the end of the movie, it's like one of the dogs and the cat, I think, right? They run over the horizon back to the house.
Yeah.
And they make it look like one of the dogs doesn't make it. Right. And I remember I cried so much, man, thinking this dog didn't make it. And then the other dog comes up brings it up the rear, like over the horizon. I was like,
tears of joy.
Yeah, tears of joy. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, I didn't cry when I got my black belt. I didn't cry when Atlas was born. Yeah, I mean, I probably cried when I lost Worlds or something like that. But yeah, like, you know.
It's okay to cry, everyone.
It is okay to cry.
It's okay to
though,
cry.
Yeah. But yeah, it's
but
something
if you do, you're a pussy. Not really.
but it's something special, right?
Yeah.
You know, I've seen, so many guys get their black belts while I was in Brazil, and they just, man, they couldn't even give their sort of speech. Most of the time when people are awarded their black belts, they give a little bit of
opportunity to talk.
an opportunity to yeah. And man, so many of them, they couldn't even put words together because they were just crying. So you don't have to cry when I give you a black belt, but it's
I like how you said when.
Yeah. I mean, crap. Something special. So I want that for my students too. Yeah. And for me,
I might cry.
Yeah, I'm crying now because at the end of the day, it's my reputation, not on the line, but you by default represent me to some extent.
100%.
So I want you to be, you don't have to be the toughest black belt in the world, but if that 2-stripe white belt knows more jiu-jitsu techniques and the fundamentals of why they work and leverage and principles of jiu-jitsu than you, well, I done fucked up.
Yeah, 100%. Some online academy. Some Ashton Kutcher fucking brown belt right here. God.
Oh, God. Give him a break, bro.
Fuck him.
I like Ashton Kutcher.
No, fuck you. Jiu-jitsu shit. Fuck him. All right. I think that's it.
Tune in next episode. We have Ashton Kutcher on the podcast.
Yeah. This show is sponsored by Coca-Cola. Yeah. So I think that's a good place to leave it. I know that all of your students present and probably future will need to it's advisable that they listen to this episode because this is like the fucking key. But if you're in a similar position or you're, maybe one of these things resonate with you or you have a follow-up question, we do Q&As every 10 episodes. So the next Q&A episode will be episode 40. If you want to submit a question to the show, you can do so around your belt progression or anything else. You can do so at our Instagram, which is @BeyondJiu-Jitsu_podcast. And there's a link in our bio there.
And do it in advance, guys. We actually record due to our schedule. We record a couple of weeks in advance.
Yes.
So I'm saying that now because I had a guy just message me this morning saying, question for episode 30, which hasn't come out yet at the time we're recording.
Yep.
Episode 30 is our next Ask
it's
Your
already
Black Belt,
already up.
By the time you're listening, this will already come out. But the way we record, I'm like, bro, that's already been recorded, and that episode is already about to come out.
Yeah.
So your question won't make it till episode 40. So send them in, guys. We hold on to the questions, and then but yeah, the next one that is yet to be recorded, episode 40. So don't wait until you see us release episode 39 because episode 40 would have already been recorded.
100%. All good. All right. So thanks for listening. And until next time, see you.
Wow.